We're back with chapter 14. We left off in our last lecture talking about how colors will affect which pollinators will visit plants, with bats and moths visiting light-colored plants because of the reflection of the light from the moon lighting them up, versus those bright colors for things like birds, butterflies, and bees. The shape of the flower actually will make a big difference too. So if it's got a tube type shape, so like you can see over here with the bird, or if you've watched things like butterflies come to flowers, they've got those long type of shapes for the flowers. Those tubes are going to be for pollinators with long tongues, or like the beaks with tongues for birds. So you're going to get tube flowers for those kinds of pollinators. If the flower is a more closed type flower, like this one here, where a larger insect can't necessarily get into, those are going to be pollinated by bees. And we have very different sizes of bees. You might say, well, a big bumblebee can't get into some of these flowers, and some of them can't. But if you've ever seen a snapdragon, that's one of those flowers that sometimes people might have made sing. If you pinch the sides of them, they open and close, but the flowers are normally closed. Those flowers are actually pollinated specifically by bees, specifically certain types of bees, because the bottom part of the flower only opens when a specific size of bee lands on it and climbs inside. If the bee or insect is too heavy, it opens too far and they fall off. If it's too light, it won't open and they can't get in to get to the nectar and pollinate the flower. Then we saw that in that video with the smells, there are rotten meat type flowers that smell. Those are going to attract things like flies. Sweet smelling flowers, and these are the flowers that we tend to like a lot, are going to be the ones that are going to attract the pollinators who can smell, and those are going to be moths, butterflies, and bees. They all have a good sense of smell, and you may notice that they like to come to those same flowers. This is also why bees will come to things like open soda cans, because they can smell the sugar, which is the same thing they're searching for in flowers. Flowers with no odor are going to be pollinated by things with no sense of smell, or a poor sense of smell, which are the birds. Hummingbirds actually have a very poor sense of smell. So that's why their flowers, like the one that you see up here being pollinated by the hummingbird, are not going to have a very strong scent. And so, if you ever notice, a hummingbird going to specific flowers, go ahead and give them a sniff, because you'll notice that they generally don't have any or much of a scent to them. The other thing is the amount of nectar. So the amount of nectar that a flower produces is going to also be tied to its pollinator. If the flower makes a lot of nectar, that means it's going to be pollinated by one of these flyers, because if you fly, that is going to take a lot of energy. So our birds, our butterflies, our bees, our bats, those flowers are going to be producing a lot of nectar all the time, because there's no point in them having a visit just once. So those flowers are going to have to keep producing nectar so that the birds will keep coming back. If there's no nectar, so the flowers aren't making any nectar at all, that's when you're going to be having pollinators like flies coming in, or you're going to have things like beetles coming in to look for food or shelter or something like that, because they're not looking for a bribe in the sense of nectar as their reward. They're looking for the reward in a different type of manner, or they're being tricked like the flies are, because there's no food actually to be found. But I mentioned that not all of the angiosperms have what we think of as flowers. And here are two of those. This is a tree that does not have a pollinator. In fact, a good number of trees don't have regular pollinators. This is a grass flower, so you can see here are the male portions, the stamens hanging out, and you can see a little bit, the parts of these fuzzy parts are the female parts. stigmas and so forth sticking out. So this is what a grass flower looks like. So this is grass. Both of these types of angiosperms are still going to use the wind like our other groups to move things around. So these guys are going to use pollen, wind to move their pollen around. This tree, if you've ever parked underneath of it, you'll know your car turns yellow because they produce a lot of pollen since they're still using wind. This is also a big reason why we have allergy seasons in Ohio, especially because we have these two wind pollinators. They're still putting tons of pollen out into the air that we have that reaction to. So this is just to sum up those four groups again. So we've got them all in one place. So we've got the non-vascular plants, the vascular seedless plants, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms with all of their kind of major life stage information to keep them kind of straight. So the next part is to talk about just some special features as far as plants go. So as far as relationships between plants and other organisms, and plants and animals kind of have a love-hate relationship. So we talked about seed dispersal in an earlier lecture, and I mentioned things like hitching a ride. So this is kind of the hate part of the relationship, in the sense that, animals aren't too thrilled about being used as transportation. These can be uncomfortable if you get them in the wrong place, like on this poor dog, or if you get too many of them, right? Or, in the wrong spot, if you get them into tender type tissue. So in this case, the plant is definitely benefiting, but the animal not really is getting anything out of this. We also saw that seeds can fly or float, but kind of the love part of the relationship is that some of the plants provide food. And so this is actually a good thing for both the animals and the plants. The animals get the nutrition from the fruit, and the plants get their seeds moved around. So, and very often the seeds will get moved quite far away from the parent plant, because a lot of times those seeds are small enough that the animals will actually eat the seed and then carry it away before they eliminate it or leave it in a nice little pile of feces, which also gives it a nice little boost of nutrients. So how does this work as far as the love part of the relationship between plants and animals with fruits? Well, first, fruits have to be colorful. So think about different fruits that you know. Usually the first ones that come to mind are things like apples and oranges and bananas. And if you think about it, those are all very colorful. Other fruits that we don't think of as commonly that are still fruits are things like peas and green beans and cucumbers. Those are all fruits, but they're not going to actually be moved around in the same way as what we're looking at here, because they're not very colorful and they're not going to taste as good. And that's the second part of how this works, as far as getting basically animals bribed to move your seeds around. So the fruits have to be colorful, they have to taste good in order to get an animal to eat it and move it around. Now, some of us might argue, well, I like green beans, I like peas, and that is true. However, we've also, remember, altered those crops so that they taste better. The original plants did not have those flavors and textures that we have today. So just like with corn is the same way. Corn's much sweeter today and much juicier than the original plants were. The last thing is that the fruit is good for the animal in some way. It contains, lots of sugars. It contains, vitamins and so forth that help out the animal. So it gives that animal some sort of benefit to continue to eat those fruits and move those seeds around for the plant. So those are the main things that need to happen in order for fruit to work kind of as a bribe to get the animals to eat them, and then move the seeds around. So can seeds still sprout after being by an animal? Definitely. You can test it for yourself. I know that sounds gross. Actually, you've probably already experienced this. If you've ever eaten corn, that's the most common one that we see this with in humans. You are probably familiar with the fact that corn can come back out of our bodies um, pretty much looking like it did when it came in. So when you eat corn, especially like corn on the cob, the outer coating on a corn kernel, that protective outer coating is pretty tough. And so you can actually, now I'm not saying, that you should try it because most of the corn that we eat has been cooked in some way, but those corn kernels that come out in your feces actually can be still intact. They could still have the endosperm and the embryo inside of them. That's the one that we can generally see. But the smaller and harder the seeds are, the more likely they are to make it through a digestive system of an animal. And so think about things like tomato seeds and seeds on things like strawberries or in raspberries and blackberries. In fact, you've probably experienced the blackberry type thing before with birds defecating on your car. If you've ever been around a blackberry or a mulberry tree, I'm sure you've had to clean some seeds off of your car before, and those seeds are actually still going to sprout if they would get into some soil. So we started off the very beginning of the lecture talking about one of the problems, other than trying to reproduce and get your offspring moved away from you with being a plant, is that you can't run away. And so how do you resist your predators? Well, let's take a look at some defenses that some plants have come up with. So one is some sort of anatomical structure. So you've put something into your actual body structure to help protect you. So one is what we've seen with conifers and other tree type plants, and that is to have some sort of bark. So some sort of thicker layer to either shed in order to get rid of yourself of pests or to keep them from being able to chew you. Or you can have some sort of spines, thorns, stickers, something to keep organisms from being able to actually bite the tissue of your structure. Then we saw the sticky traps, the pine pitch for the conifers that you could have. And here you can see this is the amber, this is the preserved part of it, and you can see the insects that get stuck in it. This is even a little tiny praying mantis, so it does work really well. Another option is to make chemical defenses, and this is actually the most common thing that we see next to physical defense. So plants make chemicals to defend themselves against other plants and against animals that want to eat them. So here you're seeing two different plant defenses. One is this guy, loco weed, which makes substances that when herbivores like cattle and horses eat them, they actually get sleepy and they stop feeding for a while. And it makes them kind of act almost in like a drunk manner when they eat it, and that's why they call it loco weed. The other one over here, some of you may have run into. This is a up-close version of looking at stinging nettles, so you can actually see the nettle part. They are needle-like hairs that can inject chemicals into your skin, and they will make it sting and burn when you get in contact with it. Another chemical defense that many of you might be familiar with is poison ivy. Poison ivy creates an oil that will get onto your skin, and it gets into your skin and creates an allergic reaction in some people. It's not in all people because it's genetic, but many people have that reaction. Okay, I'm going to finish up here, and I will pick back up with what we can do as humans with these chemical defenses of plants.